Hi there, it's Gina Gardiner. For those who don't know me, I'm an international best-selling author. I'm an empowerment and relationship coach, and I work strategically with businesses to help them get the best out of their people and to become more profitable. This is day 6 of a 30-day challenge to do a Facebook Live every single day, looking at a whole range of issues that affect everyday life. And to start with, I was asking people to help me with the challenge by sharing issues that they're finding difficult, because it's so much easier to work to and help answer questions and talk about issues that people bring up, rather than me just guessing what are the things that actually people want to know more about, things that are important. And I was very pleased to have one of the comments that came from yesterday's show. And in fact, there are 2 or 3 comments that I will be following up over the next couple of days. And I was asked by one of the listeners, what do you do when, how do you manage when people are rude, impolite, people don't show the same standards of compassion and behavior that you think are important? And I think before I answer that, it's sensible to think about, how is it that we are each operating in the world, and what can make that easier, what will make that more difficult? Each of us has within our mind, within our thought process, a very clear blueprint about what we think is right and wrong, fair, unfair. It's also a set of criteria that we have created, which say to us, in order to feel happy or loved or rejected or cross, these are the sorts of things that I need to experience. These are the behaviors that I need to see and hear and feel from other people, in order that actually makes me feel that criteria is being met. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I work a lot with couples, and usually when they come to me, they come because they want their relationship to be better. Things don't have to be bad, but they particularly want things to be better. And sometimes those relationships are being challenged. And when we start to analyze what's going on, very often the problem has arisen, if there is one, because the core values may match. By core values, things like trust, fidelity, love, humor, compassion, caring, whatever it is that is important to those people. They may use the same words, but actually what they need are different behaviors from their partner in order to feel loved. What's really crucial to understand, actually, is that it's much more about you than it is about your partner. It's much more about what you need in order to feel loved, rather than if your partner is behaving in a particular way, assuming that it's all their fault, because they're working to their blueprint. Great if the blueprint's the same, very unlikely unless the 2 of you have communicated very clearly about what your core values are, why they're important to you, and how you need to be treated in order to feel that you are able to trust that person, that you feel loved and held by that person, that you feel that that person has compassion and care for you. So the starting point always has to be you. Look at the relationship you have with yourself and look at what is your blueprint, and you'll have a blueprint for being loved, being happy, a blueprint for what you think is good manners, a blueprint for what you think is your work ethic. We have a blueprint, we have a map, we have a plan for everything. Now, for the vast majority of the time, we're completely unconscious of those things. They are triggered simply because something happens and we haven't thought about it, but it makes us feel uncomfortable or it makes us feel good. And those feelings are what we interpret, rather than taking it back a step to what is it I'm experiencing and what is that actually satisfying within me in order for me to feel loved or cherished, or for me to think, yeah, that person's got the same values as me in sense of manners, or our understanding of what's appropriate behavior, compassionate behavior actually matches. So we are all in our own little world, and we make huge assumptions that other people's worlds will be the same, that we'll have the same beliefs, the same value systems, the same standards, and the reality is not true. Let's take it to a very, very simplistic form. Think about how many people's houses you've been into and the level of tidiness that you find in people's houses, the level of cleanliness, how much clutter. And each person will live within the tolerance of what they can manage, whether their house, I've been into people's houses where you have to clear the seat in order to sit down. I'm reminded when I was a head, and sometimes if a child was having a difficulty, parents couldn't get them to school, I'd go and collect them. And you would see vast variations in terms of the way in which people lived. And I'm not making any judgment about that. I'm just simply saying it's different. So the level of busyness or clutter, or the colour decoration that you would want in your house may not match somebody else's. Indeed, it won't. And the level that you tolerate, the level of untidiness or cleanliness that for you is your norm, is likely to be very different for somebody else. But that is also true of manners, of levels of compassion and kindness, of people's relationship with truth. Some people are very economical with the truth and think that that's okay. Some people think it's okay to tell white lies in order to protect another person. Somebody else will want it straight down the line and will want that they see things in, that truth is truth and falsehoods are falsehoods. However, there are times when there is an absolute, but a lot of times it is about people's interpretation of the situation, which is their truth, but it may not be somebody else's truth who's also witnessed what's gone on. Now, inevitably, you are going to come across people who have a very, very different blueprint to yours in all walks of life. Whether you're talking about your professional life and whether people have the same work ethic or they have the same approach to dealing with other people, to dealing with challenge, a whole range of things. In fact, everything you meet in life, you are going to have your set of rules, which may or may not match other people's. If you think about teenagers, for example, that they will be testing out the rules, seeing which of those rules that the parents are putting in place that they can get away with breaking. They're testing the boundaries. And the parents who are inconsistent with boundaries will find that their children will test and test and test and test until something goes very definitely wrong, either in terms that the child gets themselves into trouble or that the parent gets to the point where they say this far and no further, and then there's a big row and so on. Each of us, there isn't anybody who's immune from this. We have our map of the world. And we tend to spend time with people who have similar maps of the world. You don't tend to, unless you're forced to, spend time with people where you find that they are really challenging to. And there are a couple of big exceptions. One of those is family. The old saying, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. And often people will find that there is a mismatch in terms of the blueprint that people see. And that can be in terms of parents not giving children love in the shape, in the format that child feels it ought to be. So I deal a lot with people who are struggling to make sense of their past, and they feel that their parents have been incredibly critical. Now, when I've asked that person to talk to their parents, if they're still alive, about the way in which they brought their children up, the way they talked to them, the way they were critical about what they'd done, in the vast majority of cases, those parents have been surprised, because what they've said is, I just wanted you to have a better life than me. I wanted you to be the best you could be. So I didn't want you to settle for second best. I wanted you to have the best you can have. And therefore, I was always encouraging you to be better. Now, if the child has taken that as, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, then there's a challenge. And often those children who have done that carry that sense of being unworthy right the way through, sometimes their entire adulthood. So if you are in the company of people who have a very different standard to you, you have some choices to make. In the first instance, I think it's very contextually driven. So if you are within a family situation and you have a different set of standards and those people are upsetting you because they are ignoring you, withdrawing from you, being critical of you, being unkind to you, you have a decision to make whether to withdraw, to react, and how you react, whether you're going to react angrily or whether you're going to meet their unkindness, for example, with more unkindness, or whether you're going to perhaps go and give them a hug and say, sorry you feel like that, because I love you. And there's any number of different responses. If you're in a situation where it's a stranger who's actually been unreasonable, one of the things to consider is you don't know what's going on in their lives, and they may have been inconsiderate. And I'm not condoning the inconsiderate as being inconsiderate or the being not showing compassion, but you actually don't know what's going on in their lives. And those of you that have listened to some of my videos or read the book will know I give the example of a guy sitting in a train. His children are climbing the walls, being an absolute pain in the what's-it, and people getting very frustrated and irritated. But what if I then said that that person had just got the news that their wife was terminally ill and had a very few days to live? The fact that he was not watching his children, he was not keeping them in check, takes on a whole different ballgame. And we never know what other people's stories are. What I do know is we are responsible for our emotional state, our emotional well-being. And every time you choose to be upset, aggrieved, angry, frustrated, depressed because of the way in which somebody else has behaved, that other person's not affected by that, but you are. And long after that person has disappeared, you're still carrying that baggage, that emotional charge that's negative, and the other person hasn't got a clue. So some of this is about recognizing you may not be able to change things, you may not be able to teach that person better. However, what you can do is make a decision, is this person going to impact on my life negatively? And if so, for how long and in which way? Or am I going to let it go? Now, there will be times when you think, I've got to say something. I've got to draw a line, and I've got to be clear that that's not acceptable. And I would say to you, if it's a chance meeting with somebody you're never going to meet again, I would suggest to you it's not worth it unless they're doing something that you feel is totally and utterly unacceptable, and you want to give that person your view, but be very wary about how you do it. If it's somebody you're going to spend a lot of time with, it's a friend, it's a family member, it's a colleague, then I would suggest that you always get your emotional state in check. And then that you have a conversation. And one of the conversation ways you might do it, neutral voice, neutral body language, is to say, when you behave that way, it just seems to me that lacks a bit of compassion And, you know, maybe there's another way to look at it. But you have to be aware that actually you are suggesting to that other person that you want a different map of the world, that you think that what they're doing is not appropriate. If you're a manager or a parent, then it's really important that you set the expectations of what is appropriate and what is expected in the context of the family or in the context of your team or your work, and then you hold people to account. So I was working with a client, a business client today, and we were talking about just that there were a few issues with staffing. And I pointed out to them, actually, you know, you'd put things in place, but you haven't followed through. That you said this is the expectation, but rather than the first time that expectation was not met, saying something and it not being a big thing, but just saying, do you remember the conversation we had? That behaviour is not what we expect from you. Please do this. It had been left and it had been left and it had built up. And then it builds up to the point usually where people get really, really cross and there's a big explosion. And actually the minute that you get cross and there's an explosion of your temper or your frustration, you lose the moral high ground. So with all of this, I'm not saying that in any way that you should condone bad behaviour, that you should condone things that you don't agree with, but I think there are ways of managing it. And ultimately, you have to decide which battles you're going to fight. You can't fight them all. Now, if we were talking about, you know, fighting huge injustice, I think that we're talking about something different. There's somebody who has behaved in a way that shows a lack of consideration. You have to make a decision whether you are going to react to it in terms of the person themselves and what you're going to take away from the situation. And, you know, long after the situation's gone, how are you going to be feeling? Are you going to hold on to it? Because that is like holding on to toxicity. It doesn't do anything to the other person, but it does to you. What I would say to you is make sure you spend time with positive people. Make sure you spend time with people who have the same values, the same core things that they think are important. Because when you spend time with people who have the same view around, you know, being positive, being compassionate, being kind, living from a place of love, that makes it much easier for you to then project that out into the world and to deal with people who don't have the same views and actually show by example. Because I think the best way to teach anybody is to model the very behaviours that you want to receive from them. Because then you can talk to them over time if they're people that you know about. You never hear me be unkind. You don't hear me gossip. You don't hear me put people down. And I do that because I think it's important. And that's what I would say to children and staff at my school, is you never hear me be rude. You don't hear me shout and scream. You don't hear me be unkind. I get myself into a place of being calm and able to deal with something before I actually respond. And I think that's a really sound bit of advice, because if you do things at the height of your temper, your frustration, your unhappiness, then you're likely to say or do something which is not going to be helpful, and maybe you'll regret. Now, that does not mean you ignore it. So in that context, I would say to a member of staff or to a child, right, I'm going to deal with this, but I'm cross with you at the moment, so I'm going to get myself together and then we're going to talk about it. So that you raise the marker, but listen to the voice that I'm using. Very neutral, very calm, very measured, because then it's much more difficult for them to wriggle. But if you decided that you were going to challenge everybody that was that didn't do things in the way that you think they should be done, you're going to have a very busy time. You're not going to have a chance to do anything other than that, because everybody's blueprint is different. And because it's your blueprint makes it right for you, There, of course, are some universal things that we all think are wrong, hurting other people, both physically and emotionally. And if you see somebody being hurt, then you want to do something about it. But there are ways to go about it that aren't going to add petrol to the fire. So one of the challenges for me when I'm talking about this is that the context can change so enormously, and that will make a difference. But the principles are, you manage yourself first, that you have a blueprint which is different to other people. Let me give you another example. When I first became a head, and I was very young and very green, I was the youngest on the staff bar too. And I had a particular member of staff who was incredibly challenging. She used to say, I'm a blunt northerner and I call a spade a bloody shovel. And she thought that gave her carte blanche to be unkind, to tell people what she thought, to be very judgmental to other people. And there many times she had young members of staff over the years that she was there in tears. And I made the decision very early on that if she was unkind to other people, I would check that. I would challenge her about that. But if she was unkind to me, I was only going to respond with kindness and calm and compassion. Now, it wasn't quick, I have to say, and there were times when she didn't know how much she'd upset me. She certainly didn't know how many sleepless nights that she caused me. However, over time, she changed, and the relationship that she had with me and with others changed and became much kinder and much more compassionate, and she was much happier. Now, we don't always have that time. She was with me as a member of staff for 5 or 6 years, so I had the time to work on her. But I think with all of those of you that listen to this either live or listen to this later on, be very clear about there will be people who find your behaviours don't fit with their blueprint. It's so easy to go into judgmental view. People should be like this, they shouldn't do that, when you don't know the background. It's also my belief that for the most part, when people are being unkind, in the vast majority of cases, or that they're withdrawing or that they're ignoring you, and that you make meaning of that, the people are doing the best they can. Now, does that mean that we should say, well, what can you do? People are horrible and, that's it. No, it's not what I'm saying. But I think if you model good behavior, if you model the principles that you live by, if actually you reach out to that person and send them, if not actually in a hug or in reality, you just send them some love, send them some kindness, send them some compassion, that it will make a difference. Because if we fight fire with fire, fear with fear, aggression with aggression, we're just going to get more. And something needs to change. Which leads me to share with you that I have this huge mission. My huge mission is to help a million people, to actually positively impact on 1 million people within the next 5 years. Maybe not directly all of them, but through the people that I help and support to think perhaps slightly differently, to step into the power, to recognize that they are the most amazing, powerful human beings when each of us is being authentically, genuinely who we are. That each of those people in turn will start to have a positive impact on the people that they meet and the people that they meet. But I need your help. Please share these videos, share the posts, share the fact that people can have a free download of the last book. It's an international bestseller, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. All they've got to do is to go to the website, genuinely-you, and download it. Or try out the Thrive Tribe for $1 for a month and see whether being part of a positive community who are wanting to support one another that we can grow that community, and in doing so, grow that community to actually spread compassion, a sense of well-being, a sense of possibilities and positive behavior, and we can send that out into the world. Now, within the Thrive Tribe, there is a whole structured program designed to help you have empowering beliefs, a great relationship with yourself, be able to manage change and transition, all sorts of themes that will actually support you in living a more happy, successful and empowered life. There's also a Facebook Live group where there's support. You can ask any questions, bring up issues, and celebrate your successes. And there is an interactive live coaching session twice a month. So if you're interested, the link is on the explanation at the top of the program. Give it a go. So I would wish for you that you will actually take on board the principles that this Facebook Live is about. Manage your own emotional status. That's your responsibility, not anybody else's. That if somebody is doing something that you find frustrating, upsetting, that you don't agree with, beware of taking that baggage and holding on to it. Because if you do, don't hurt them, it hurts you. Recognize that your blueprint is going to be different to other people's. And if you're embarking upon a relationship with a significant other, or in the work context, talk about what your core values are and have a look at what behaviors you need to experience in order to know that that core value has been met. And that's just as important in the work environment. And if you're a team leader or a manager, what are your core values for your team or your organization? Because if everybody knows what they are, and if people are held to account for them, everybody will be happier. But if you're in a relationship, however long that relationship has been going, it's never too late to consider your core values and to talk about how those are, how you feel they've been met in terms of experiencing the behavior of the other person, and when you feel that they are being challenged. So hope it's been useful. Please share. Please let us know what anything themes that you'd like covered, any questions. And thanks so much for joining me. But I really urge you, help me with my mission. Help me help people feel better about themselves, to feel more compassionate, to feel that life is precious and wonderful, and to make the most of it. Thank you so much. Take care. Lots of love.